All right, I need you to picture with me a normal Monday morning. Or if you're, somebody's always like, oh gosh, okay. Or if you're a shift worker, think about your first day of your 7 on, if you're coming off of your 7 off, or if you work a Canadian schedule, when you know how to go to work, my friend, I have no idea. May the Lord bless you in that. But just imagine whatever that looks like for you. And the alarm goes off, breaking this beautiful silence that you've been enjoying for the last few hours. And so you reach over and in a dazed and confused fog, you reach out and smash the snooze button wherever it might be. And then you grab your phone and check social media because you got to know what happened overnight. You look at the news, check social media. And then you do all of that until the snooze goes off once again, which is most likely on your phone. And you're like, I can't put it off any longer. And so you get up. You go grab coffee because, as my wife says, that has to happen first. You go grab coffee, and you wish you could just get back in bed and enjoy your coffee, or just get back in bed, just go back to sleep. But work is coming. The inevitable and relentless daily routine of getting ready, driving to work, working your shift is now here, and it's there, and you can't avoid it any longer. Most of us, we tend to endure our work. It tends to be something like we feel like it's a necessary sort of evil in our lives. It's a paycheck, but it's not a calling. And I want you to know that as we talk about the diligent and the sluggard tonight in relationship to work, whether you work in a company, whether you work shift work, whether you work at home and your job is mainly in the home, or whether you're retired, all of these principles work in all areas of life in relationship to the sluggard and the diligent. But I want to ask you the question, what if work, whatever it looks like for you, what if it wasn't a punishment, but it was a part of God's design for your life, and it was God's design for the world? Because what if God can and will use your work in order to shape you into the vision of person that he has for you? You see, work is not a result of sin. I know many of you, this is going to disappoint a lot of you, but we will work in heaven. I know that's just comes maybe as a disappointment. But Adam and Eve worked in the perfect Garden of Eden, Genesis 2:15. He put Adam in the garden to work it and to keep it. And when we finally get to the finality of heaven, and we move into the eternal state, there will be, I believe, work as well in that time frame. Now, the frustration of work that you and I feel, that I just articulated there a moment ago, did not come until after Genesis 3 and sin. So work is part of God's perfect creation. Frustrating work is a result of sin and brokenness. And so when we treat work as a burden and something we have to endure, we're missing an opportunity that God is giving to us in his redemption plan and how he can and will shape us. And work done well, think about it like this, work done well is worship with your uniform on. If you will work diligently and do it well and do it you don't have to be the best in the world, but you got to be the best, do your best, the best of your ability, without comparing yourself to everyone else or anyone else, because God shapes each one of us differently with different skills. We'll talk about more about that here in just a second. But you do your diligent best. That is worship in a uniform. So, why is work important? Let me just going to give you just 3 quick reasons why work should be viewed as an important part of our lives. Again, whether it's in the home, whether you're retired and work looks differently from you, maybe it's just accomplishing tasks and chores and things that you've got around the home or outside of the home, and those who are in a traditional work environment. 3 reasons why work's important. First, work is godly. Now the question becomes, well, if work is so godly, why does it feel so terrible? And the reason is, I've already said, because sin broke our work. Sin broke things, and in a broken world, there's going to be thorns and thistles, and now we're going to work by the sweat of our brow, God says in Genesis chapter 3. But the answer isn't to hate work, the answer is to redeem work. That's what we need to be seeking, because work is godly. Secondly, work provides. This is almost like a given, like, yeah, no kidding. 2 Thessalonians 3:10, God says it very clearly, if a man won't work, he ought not eat. God has designed his world so that work provides for our needs. Recognizing that God is the ultimate provider, he provides me with the skills and the opportunity to have the job that I have and to do the work that I can do in order to provide not only for myself, but for my entire family. Work is designed to provide. We shouldn't rely on the government to provide. That's just an aside on that part. For some, now let me also say this, for some, the hardest work is also going to be unseen work in our provision. The night shift, changing diapers, caring for aging parents. But the unseen work still accomplishes the provision that God wants it to accomplish. So don't miss the good of work simply because no one else sees it. And the third reason that work is important is because work sanctifies. Consider it pure joy when you face trials, because trials produce endurance, James chapter 1 tells us. And perhaps more than in any other place in life, you're going to endure hardship when it comes to work. Things aren't going to go the way you want them to go or expected them to go or planned for them to go. But it's in those hardships and in those moments where you've got to be diligent in the midst of frustration that produces a godly character inside of us. And so when work is well done and it's viewed correctly, God uses our work to bring life transformation into our lives, because at work you learn about yourself a lot. You learn where you need patience and where you're not patient. You learn where you need to forgive because you haven't forgiven. You learn to choose gratitude. You learn to practice self-control instead of just the other things that we could do instead of self-control. You learn to practice being kind, at least we should, because that's a fruit of the Spirit. We practice kindness instead of vengeance or whatever else the opposite of kindness might be. All the fruit of the Spirit can be shaped in us in our work. And so work is a sanctification tool that God has for our lives. It exposes us where we still need work, and it gives us the opportunity to trust God in and with our work. So that brings us to Proverbs. Proverbs, again, as I've already mentioned, it contrasts two different people when it comes to work. The sluggard or the lazy. I like the word sluggard. It's old school, and it's just, man, it packs a punch. Yeah, sluggard. And then the diligent. Proverbs, now, again, I want to remind, as we go through this, just remember, the way to read Proverbs, they're not automatic promises. They're not promises from God. But what Proverbs are is they are observances of life that are generally, if not most of the time, the way life goes, according to the way God's designed the world. So when it comes to the sluggard, his or her life, man, it looks easy. I mean, it'd be, the sluggard, it looks like it's easy. Like you just sit around, do nothing all day, sleep all day, just put your hands to nothing all day. It looks easy, but it always ends in misery, according to Proverbs. Now, the diligent, their life is going to look hard, but it's always going to end in satisfaction, according to Proverbs. Now, I want to say this. Some of you have worked with a person who professes to be a follower of Christ, and they're a sluggard. Let me encourage you, don't judge the Bible's understanding of work based on the sluggard at your work. And just to understand, God hates laziness, and he has many warnings, as we're going to see tonight, for those who choose to be lazy. And meanwhile, God loves those who work hard, the diligent, and he has many proverbs that speak to the life that the diligent will have as they stay diligent over time. So if you have a sluggard at work, feel free to share this sermon with them. So how do you spot the sluggard? This is what we're going to do. We're going to look at 4 characteristics of the sluggard. Then we're going to look at 4 characteristics of the diligent. And then we're going to talk about how you be the diligent worker. So the 4 characteristics of the sluggard. First, understand the sluggard is defined as someone who is habitually and over time lazy. So you can't call someone a sluggard just because, they kind of fell behind on one thing. But if it is a consistent pattern where they always take the easy road and the lazy road and always try to get out of work, then you might be dealing with someone who is a sluggard. And that's contrasted with the diligent, who are those who are decisive and they're industrious. So let's look at the sluggard first. First, the sluggard puts off until tomorrow what needs to be done today. So the sluggard's motto is always, I'll get to that later, or that can wait. And a task that if you would just put your hand to it would take 5 minutes of diligent work ends up taking 5 months of procrastination. Just putting off to tomorrow what could be and needs to be done today. And there's always a harvest that comes with putting that off. There's always a harvest that comes with unnecessary and really unwarranted procrastination. Proverbs 6:6-11. Go to the ant. That's the illustration. Go look at an ant, O sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. I've worked with sluggards, like many of you. I don't work with sluggards now, just so you know. But I've worked with sluggards, and just like some of you. And here's what they will do. They will put things off, and the sluggard will go through sometimes I think if this person would put as much mental energy into working as they do into dodging work, they would probably run a Fortune 500 company. It's just unbelievable to me sometimes. And so the sluggard is one who just puts it off instead of being diligent. And so like the ant goes out and does its work when it can, so that when time comes that it cannot do its work, it cannot harvest, it's there and it's prepared. And those who choose to put off till tomorrow what needs to be done today, notice what will happen. Poverty will come upon you like a robber. It will steal life. It'll come upon you like an armed man. Poverty doesn't come upon you and say, hey, I'm going to take your stuff if you're willing. No, it just comes and it takes it. For those who put off till tomorrow what needs to be done today. Proverbs 26:15, the sluggard, this is an amazing picture. I read this to Shay this afternoon. Just imagine this picture. The sluggard buries his hand in the dish. He is too lazy to bring it back up to his mouth. Isn't that something else? Just imagine, you got that image in your mind, right? It was like they put their hand in the bowl and it's like, it's just too much work to bring it back up to here. That's exactly the picture that God is saying. It's a sign of procrastination. And here's how I interpret this to be the picture. I'm not sure if this is the exact one, but here's how I take it. The sluggard will not finish what they start. They put their hand in the bowl and just leave it there. Now, I need to say there's a difference here between being a little ADD, which is an inability to stick to a task because of ADD, but you just kind of move from task to task, and the inability to finish a task. There's difference there. But the sluggard, they will never come back and finish a task. And I can be guilty of this at times, just to be fully honest with you. I find it easier to start new things rather than to finish, get all the way down to the checklist of what needs to be done. I find it easier, for example, to start cleaning out the garage rather than finish cleaning out the closet. Let's just go start something new because I feel overwhelmed in this. And a real fear in this area of the sluggard is that if I'm diligent at work or at home, what if it's not enough, or what if it goes unnoticed? Because you see, the sluggard, they don't care about doing the work. They just care that everybody sees that they've done the work. The work is not the reward. Honoring God and worshiping God with the work is not the reward. I want to make sure everybody sees. And what if it goes unnoticed? I gave everything and it was never enough. So now it's just easier to put it off to tomorrow. Or I gave my all and no one noticed. My boss, my spouse, my family, no one saw or appreciated all of that hard work. Now here's the truth, to speak to that lie if you feel that. God sees all and God blesses faithfulness, not ability. He sees everything. As I said a moment ago, we're not created with the same abilities. I'll give you a personal example. My wife is the smartest person I know. She can see something like a problem one of our kids are having or something that I'm having, and she is able in a moment to break it down in its parts and to analyze it and to see exactly what the core problem or core thing that needs to be solved is, and is able to say, okay, here's what we need to do. While meanwhile, I'm over here in an emotional tornado, don't even really know what's going on. We're just built differently. But God doesn't look at ability and say, I'm going to honor ability. God looks at faithfulness and says, I will honor faithfulness. The second characteristic of the sluggard lives constantly desiring but never gaining. Desire without diligent effort always ends in disappointment. And here's why. Desire without diligence is just daydreaming. You're setting unrealistic expectations. So the sluggard dreams of success, usually in the form of material possessions. So I'll be happy when I get that house or get that car or get that truck or, get to be a member of that hunting lease or that country club or whatever it might be. They love to dream, but they hate to work. The sluggard, here's what they like to do. They like to look at the plow and think about all that could happen if they got the plow out and went to work and think about all the harvest, but the plow just sits there and goes rusty. Proverbs 13:4, the soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing, while the soul of the diligent is richly supplied. Now, we live in a time of shortcuts and get-rich-quick schemes. Pyramid schemes, multi-level marketing. Our age is one that longs to benefit, but dodges the work. But the reality is, again, this is why work is so important, because work sanctifies. Let me ask you, and don't say anybody's name out loud, but do you know someone that is wealthy and they did not work for it? It was just given to them. Let me ask you, generally, is that person healthy? In my experience, generally, no. Because they don't understand what work can and should do. Third, the sluggard their life ends with a broken down life and a broken down home. What happens is that the sluggard always practices neglect. And neglect always ends in brokenness. This happens, the writer of Proverbs observes it in Proverbs 24. I passed by the field of a sluggard, by the vineyard of a man lacking sense, and behold, it was all overgrown with thorns. The ground was covered with nettles, and its stone wall was broken down. So then I saw it and considered it. I looked and received instruction. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. He repeats the warning. So the writer is voicing that the sluggard's heart and the sluggard's life resembles the broken down farm that he sees. Now, I need to offer a caveat. Again, Proverbs are observations, not promises. So don't drive by your neighbor's house and be like, hey, your flower beds look terrible. Your life is probably a mess. But over time, those who neglect, they will, you just see it over time. It's neglect this, neglect that, and it's little things. Notice it's a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands. It's not necessarily one gigantic decision, but it's 1,000 small decisions that are made over a lifetime that leads to a broken down home and a broken down life. Because here's the reality, neglect is never neutral. If you neglect something, it doesn't go away, does it? It just continues to deteriorate. Now we have, here where we live, we have a living example of this. If you drive down I-10 towards Iowa, look off to the north at a certain point and you see a water park that was neglected. And you can tell, and I think if we could do the same thing that the writer of Proverbs does here, then I saw it and I considered it. And I looked and I received instruction. It was neglected and it fell apart, the same as a life will do. If you neglect pursuing diligent life in Jesus, your soul will fall apart. Fourth, the sluggard is wise in his own eyes. And I should have added only. So pride nearly always seems to accompany the sluggard. And typically because it's pride that they hide behind. So Proverbs 26:16, the sluggard is wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who can answer sensibly. The sluggard, this idea of wise in his own eyes and 7 men, the number 7 here, it's a symbolic number meaning completeness or wholeness. And so basically what the Proverbs is saying is the sluggard thinks he knows better than every last human being that has ever lived in the entire history of the world, and they don't listen to anyone or anything. The sluggard is wise in his own eyes, but he refuses to do the hard work to think something through. And the sluggard considers his own 5-minute judgment to be the right answer, and no one can sway them from that answer. Once it's done, it's done. And so the writer is saying that the sluggard listens to no one because he believes no one can answer better than he can. And the simple reality is that the reason a sluggard listens to no one is that no one is going to encourage him to continue to be a sluggard. And so he continues to not listen to anyone. There's so much more we can say here. I've skipped quite a bit here. But these 4 characteristics, and there's a few more in the Proverbs, but those are 4 main ones. But now let's contrast that with the diligent. How do we spot the diligent? 4 characteristics of the diligent. First, the diligent spend their time working instead of talking about working. So in our age of social media, it seems that more words are spoken or typed than in the history of the world. But the Proverbs is clear. Talk accomplishes nothing if it is not backed up by diligent work to make it happen. It's just words. Talk, this is important. Talk looks like work from a distance. But once you get up close, you realize there's nothing there. So you can listen to someone talk, it's like, man, that sounds great. But then when you get in behind it, it's like, but nothing's happening. It just sounds great. Proverbs 14:23, in all toil there is profit, but mere talk only ends in poverty. The diligent don't just simply talk about goals. They set mile markers and mileposts and real achievable goals, and then they work to get to those goals. They don't simply talk about the future vision for their life. They put action to that vision for their life. So I'll pick on pastors here for a minute since I'm picking on myself. Pastors tend to be ones who are great at talking, but we're not always great at executing. I was in a church planting program for about 18 months, and man, they put us through everything. I had to come up with a vision, I had to come up with a mission, I had to come up with goals, I had to come up with a philosophy of ministry. And I remember at some point after about 12 to 14 months of doing this, I looked at the guy who was leading and kind of my mentor, and I was like, hey, when are we gonna get to work? Planning is important. These were all necessary steps, but I didn't need to take 14 months to do them. I was ready to go to work. I was ready to go plan church. I was ready to take these things that God had put in my heart and let's go live this thing out. And let's see how the Lord leads and how the Lord takes it. And so in a world that we live in that tends to celebrate the appearance of work over actually working and to celebrate talking about work, the diligent are the quiet and the faithful, diligent worker behind the closed doors. Most often the one that nobody sees, but they're the ones who are actually the engine making everything run and move. Second, the diligent thinks ahead and avoids impulsive mistakes. So one reason that they make impulsive mistakes goes back to the sluggard mentality. They put off till tomorrow what should be done today. But then inevitably, the deadline hits. And instead of having the time to think wisely about what needs to be done, the sluggard is forced into a position where they've got to make a decision in 30 seconds. Not so the diligent. They take time to look ahead and to think about what is going on in life to avoid being put into a position where they have to make an impulsive decision. Proverbs 21:5, the plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. I heard Joe Sengel talk about this. Joe Sengel is a Christian financial advisor. I heard him talk about this at my last church. And the way he explained it is he asked the question, do you want to know why those who are already wealthy always seem to be the ones who get the opportunity and just continue to grow their wealth? He said, here's what they've done. They're not smarter than we are. They don't have more ability than we are. Here's what they have done, though. They have thought things through, and they have gotten themselves ready and positioned themselves. And then he climbed up on a ladder when he said this. They are looking at life in a different plane and in a different horizon, and they're looking farther ahead than usually anyone else is. And so they see the opportunity before anyone else sees it. But then they also, because they have worked hard behind the scenes up to that point, they have the means to take advantage of the opportunity when it comes. That's the diligent. The sluggard, they saw the opportunity fly by while they were sitting watching Netflix in their pajamas eating Bluebell, and the opportunity was gone before they could find their pants. That's what the sluggard looks like. But the diligent see the opportunity and they are ready for it when it comes. Diligent isn't just working hard, it's working hard and planning wisely. One of the greatest and biggest areas that we can do this, of course, is in our financial life. Because the diligent, they don't get lost in what I call the tyranny of the urgent. But they always focus on today with an eye towards tomorrow as well. Third, the diligent is self-motivated and does not need constant oversight. One of the most frustrating job experiences that I ever had was when I was in college. And I had a supervisor who, again, she was one of those who, like, if she had put as much mental power into working as she did into avoiding work, she would have probably run the entire hospital that we worked at. But man, she was a genius at avoiding work. She would sit at her desk. I don't know what, she looked busy. But to this day, I don't know. I think she had her screen off and was just clicking keyboards because nothing ever got done. And then she would hand me a pile of stuff this big and say, and I'm a part-time employee, and say, I need you to do all this before you go home today. Not only that, but she smoked. And she took 15-minute smoke breaks every hour and a half. Now, I know some of you have probably dealt with that before. Hopefully it's not you that are taking the smoke breaks, but you've dealt with people who do that. But she was also friends with the boss, so everything was overlooked. There was no self-motivation to her. The diligent, you can't stop them. They are motivated in and of themselves. You don't have to look over their shoulder. You don't have to watch the time clock on them. They are self-motivated. Again, I'm going to read Proverbs 6. We read it earlier about the ant. Go to the ant, O sluggard, and consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. No one has to tell the ant, hey, it's time to go to work. No one has to tell the diligent it's time to go to work. They are the ones who usually set the pace for when it's time to go to work. The diligent are self-motivated, and they're motivated by God instead of the praise of man. Now, this is important because Proverbs 29:25 says that the fear of man is a trap or a snare. And I'm going to tie this in to self-motivation, because here's what I've seen happen, and I felt it in my own life in other areas of work. One reason self-motivation is not evident or it dwindles in a person is because usually a person at work who is self-motivated gets accused of being a suck-up to the boss. And so what do? Nobody wants to be the one who stands out and everybody points their finger at them. And so that self-motivation just gets deteriorated. Why? Because of fear of man instead of fear of the Lord. Because Proverbs 1:7, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom and knowledge. If you shift your work ethic, friends, based on what other people think or say or whisper, you're living in fear of man when we need to be living in fear of the Lord. And a fear of man is a trap, and it will trap you. So be productive, not dodgy. Next, the diligent lead when necessary. So the diligent often find themselves in leadership because they're the ones ready for the opportunity when it comes their way. They're self-motivated people who've worked diligently at their task and on themselves. And so when opportunity comes, the decision is made, and the diligent typically rise to the top. That's what Proverbs 12:24 says. The hand of the diligent will rule, while the slothful will be put under task work. Diligence earns trust. And in a good place, trust opens doors. But even if that's not the case, remember, God honors faithfulness. And so God sees that faithfulness as well. Now, one biblical example of this is Joseph. Joseph is the reluctant leader who always, because God was with him, he always rose to the top. Why? Because he was diligent in his work. If you go read his story, we went through his story earlier this year, reading through all of it in Genesis, but he consistently, wherever he found himself, he put himself diligently to work. Put himself in Potiphar's home, and when he went to prison, put himself diligently to work at Potiphar's home. And in both cases, he rose to the top. If you are diligent, let me just encourage you, if you are diligent, be ready, because opportunities are going to come, and they're going to come your way in time. So how do I work like the diligent? How do we begin to do this? Let's say, man, hopefully you're not the sluggard, but maybe you're a little bit halfway in between. How do you begin to continue to improve and become the diligent that God has a vision for you to be? First, know the reasons for your work and connect to the big picture of God for your life. Know the reasons for your work and connect them to the God picture of your life. Again, work is worship with a uniform on. Proverbs 16:3, commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established. Proverbs 16:9, it's out here in our hallway. The heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. Colossians 3:23 through 24 in the New Testament. Whatever you do, this is also the theme verse for First Baptist Christian Academy this year. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. There is more meaning in your work than just simply accomplishing the daily tasks. And to see that, always see your work in the grand scheme of the eternal that God is doing in your life. And so instead of focusing on, hey, am I achieving the American dream? Focus on, am I being faithful to the calling that God has put upon my life? Because, listen, friends, chasing the American dream is like throwing darts at a board to win at bowling. You're playing the wrong game. That's not the scale that God's going to measure anything by. I mean, listen, the way I've heard it said before is, are you good at the things that are going to eternally matter? Because those are the things that we need to put our heart and our focus upon. And so, as you connect your work, one of the things I would encourage you to ask is, what is your witness like at work? Let me ask it a different way. Is your workplace better with your presence? Do you lift the joy level? Do you lift the gratitude level? Do you lift the peace level? Or do you bring the chaos? Is your work better because you're there? Next, develop your skills at your work. Strive to get better. And don't be as good as so-and-so, but be the best that you can be. Because again, God's given each one of us different abilities. And so God doesn't desire us just to work, but he wants us to work skillfully. Proverbs 22:29. Do you see a skillful man in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men. So skill is not just the ability to work, but it is the ability to work combining it with God's wisdom. That's what brings skill. And so developing skill, it can be a lost art in many ways because typically, again, we live in a world that it's like I want quick results and quick things to happen, but skill takes time to develop. So one of the things I would encourage you to do is don't chase recognition, but chase improvement on two levels. One, improve your skills. Whatever your job is, keep getting better at it. Don't ever stop being a learner at your job and at your profession, at your skill. But then secondly, work on the skill of having a character that emulates and reflects the Lord. Because I'm convinced at this point in my life, I'm 47 years old. I know that's young to some of you, but I'm convinced at this point in my life that here's what God does. God gives opportunity to those who are ready, not necessarily the talented. It's not talent. God's not looking for talent. He's looking for diligence. And God's looking for faithfulness. So instead of always chasing what's next, just focus on, just maybe go through a season where it's like, man, I'm gonna work on my skill and I'm gonna work on my character and continue to be formed and discipled into the character of Christ. And I'm gonna trust that God will give the opportunity when I'm ready for it. My role, our role, is to be ready when the opportunity comes. Last, work with complete integrity. And I put the word complete there on purpose. Not partial integrity, but complete. The question to ask yourself when it comes to integrity, as you are a representative of Jesus, and people at work know you are a follower of Christ, here's the question I would encourage you to wrestle with. Does Jesus have a good name at your work because of you? That's working with integrity. Proverbs 16:8, better is having a little with righteousness than great revenues with injustice. And essentially God is saying, look, don't cheat to get ahead, but just be diligent. Don't put others down to get over them, but work with respect. Be the salt and light that we are called to be as God's people. So work like it matters. Work like it matters. And that starts by connecting your work to the grand picture of what God is doing in your life. Look, Jesus himself, before he was a rabbi, he was a carpenter. We don't have any details really about how good of a carpenter he was. I mean, imagine you got a table and chairs made by Jesus. They probably work really well. So I would imagine he was a very skilled carpenter because he knew Proverbs, he understood these principles, but he was also a master, the best that has ever lived, teacher and rabbi. So Jesus himself showed us how important it is to work and to be skillful. Jesus would work so diligently at being a rabbi that you've read the stories in Mark chapter 4, he could fall asleep in the front of a boat in the middle of a raging storm on a sea. That's how tired he was. Why? Because he worked that diligently. So submit yourself to Jesus in your work and he will raise you up on the day when he chooses to. And in Jesus, you have the ability to work well. And here's my last encouragement to you. If you work diligently and you feel like nobody sees, here's the reminder. Work diligently because Jesus sees every movement and every bit of your work. And the honest truth, friends, his eyes are the only ones that are going to matter for eternity. And he sees it all. So work diligently. Let's spend some time in prayer. Father, I love your word. I love your Bible that you have given us. On nights like tonight, it's so real and it hits us right where we're living, just like it always does, Lord. And so, Father, I pray for myself and for all of us here, that God, you would show us any place where we're being a sluggard, God, you would show us what it means to be diligent. And Father, we want to be faithful to you and we want to represent your Son, Jesus Christ, to the best of our ability. Help us to be salt and light to a world around us that sometimes feels so incredibly dark. But God, we can bring the light of Christ into each and every situation. So help us to be diligent in our work so that we shine Jesus to all who are with us. And we pray in Jesus' holy name, amen.